I signed the accident report at 3 in the morning, knowing it would put the blame on me because the man lying in the ambulance had 2 kids and no insurance. By sunrise, my company badge was deactivated, my name was leaking to the local news, and my lawyer told me to stay quiet. I noticed his hands shaking when he handed me the papers, and there was dried blue ink on his thumb. That was the moment I realized everything I trusted at work was about to collapse. I signed the accident report at 3 in the morning, knowing exactly what it meant. The fluorescent lights above the security office hummed like insects, and the coffee in my hand had gone cold. Outside, an ambulance idled with its back doors open, red lights bouncing off the steel siding of the warehouse. The man on the stretcher was still conscious. He kept asking for his phone. Someone said he had 2 kids. Someone else said he had no insurance. When the clipboard slid across the table toward me, I knew that if I signed, the blame would land on my shift, on my procedures, on me. I signed anyway. My name is Harper Lane. I manage logistics for a redevelopment project on the south side of Dallas, a stretch of old industrial land that used to smell like oil and rust and now smelled like fresh concrete and money. I came up the long way. Forklift operator at 19. Inventory clerk at 22. Night supervisor when no one else wanted the hours. I learned to count pallets by sound and to spot a bad load by the way a truck settled on its shocks. People like to say logistics is invisible work. It is invisible only when it works. When it fails, everyone points. The night of the accident had started like any other. I walked the floor at 10:30, boots crunching over grit, checking the tags on incoming steel. The weather app said, clear skies. The schedule said 1 late delivery, then shut down. I remember stopping near Bay C because a warning light on the safety panel blinked once and went dark. I made a note to have maintenance look at it in the morning. By midnight, the crew was tired and joking. By 1:15, the scaffolding near the loading dock gave a sound like tearing fabric. By 1:16, the floor was chaos. When the EMTs took him away, I followed the protocol. I sealed the area. I called it in. I waited. Miles Carter, the operations director, showed up with his jacket still on the hanger crease. Evan Pike arrived last, calm, hair perfect, carrying a leather folder like he had been expecting the call. Evan was our in-house lawyer, the one who sat next to me in meetings and explained clauses in plain English. He was the one who told me early on that people like us survived by being precise and loyal. He called me kid, even though I was 34. In the security office, Miles talked about exposure and timelines. Evan talked about responsibility and optics. He put the clipboard in front of me and said it softly, like advice. Sign this and the company will handle the rest. He said the words handle the rest the way people say we will take care of you. I thought of the man in the ambulance. I thought of his kids. I signed. By sunrise, my badge stopped opening doors. I stood in the parking lot with my lunch bag and tried the reader 3 times before a guard I had trained shook his head and looked away. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan telling me to go home and stay quiet. The local news site posted a short piece about a preventable accident and an unnamed supervisor under review. Someone on social media guessed my name within the hour. My mother called from her kitchen in Mesquite and asked why the neighbor had sent her a link. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner. The couch smells faintly of starch. I sat there and watched dust move in the sunlight while my hands shook, the way they had not shaken since my first day on a forklift. Evan called in the afternoon. He said he was working the angle. He said, trust me. I said, okay, because that is what I had learned to do. It was Tessa Nguyen who broke the shape of the day. She worked the systems desk, the one who knew every keypad and camera by heart. She did not call. She texted a single sentence and a time. Grocery store lot. 7:15. Come alone. When I got there, she sat in her car with the engine running. She did not look at me when she spoke. The access logs show a door opening at 11:47 last night. No one should have been there. She slid a folded printout across the console and said she had not sent it. At home, I smoothed the paper on my counter. The log was clean, almost too clean. A master account had disabled an alert, then re-enabled it 8 minutes later. Only 2 people had that level of access: Miles, Evan. My first instinct was to protect Evan from the thought. I told myself it had to be Miles. I told myself, lawyers do not walk into server rooms. Then I remembered something small. The day before the accident, Evan had asked me questions about the delivery schedule, about which doors were hot and which codes were active after midnight. He had smiled when he asked, like he always did. I tried to sleep. I could not. I kept seeing the clipboard, the way Evan's thumb pressed the corner when he handed it to me. There had been a smudge there, a faint blue stain near the nail. I had noticed it and dismissed it, the way you dismiss 1,000 small things in a day. The next morning, Dylan Brooks showed up at my door. He introduced himself as a safety inspector and asked if he could come in. He was careful with his words, the way people are when they think you are guilty. I showed him the log. He did not promise anything. He said only that purchasing records did not usually pass through legal, and yet the scaffolding order had. He left me with a card and a look that said, "Do not disappear." By noon, Evan texted again. "Steakhouse near downtown." He said he had a path to get me back. The restaurant was quiet, all dark wood and low voices. Evan already had a folder on the table. He slid it toward me like a gift. A settlement. I would waive claims. The company would not pursue charges. He said it was the only way to keep my future intact. When I asked him about the master account, his face did not change. He said there were bad actors everywhere. He said someone was trying to pit us against each other. He reached for his pocket when he said it, fingers brushing the metal of a key I had seen him carry since the day I met him. He never explained it. He never had to. I did not sign. On the drive home, a gray sedan followed me for 3 exits and then fell back. No horn, no lights. Just close enough to be a presence. I parked under my building and sat with the engine off until my breathing slowed. June Larkin called that night from a number I did not recognize. She worked in accounting and spoke like every word cost her. She said money had moved through a shell company and come back clean. She said approvals traced back to legal. She said she could give me something, but only once. The USB was warm when she handed it to me, like she had been holding it too long. I opened the files at my kitchen table. Emails restored from backups, payment schedules, names, Pike. The room felt smaller. I thought of my mother and the house she hoped I would buy for her one day. I thought of the land we were redeveloping, the way people talked about it like a blank slate. Dylan answered on the second ring. We made a plan with the calm voices of people who know panic is useless. I would agree to meet Evan again. Tessa would pull camera backups from the offline system. Dylan would line up a surprise inspection. We would move fast. The second meeting was shorter. Evan said he knew I had talked to Tessa. He said my mother's paperwork might attract attention if I made noise. He did not threaten me. He did not need to. When I asked him what he wanted, he said silence. When I asked him why, he said I did not understand what I was standing on. That night, Tessa called and said the backups were locked. She said the lock required a physical key. I pictured the blue ink. I pictured the metal glint at Evan's pocket. I pictured the clipboard at 3 a.m. I lay on my couch and stared at the ceiling. I had signed to save a man with 2 kids. I had trusted the person who told me to sign. By the time dawn came, I knew I was already past the point of pretending this was about one accident. Everything I thought I knew about how this place worked was starting to tilt, and whatever held it up was about to give way. By the time the sun came up, my phone was already vibrating on the kitchen counter. I did not answer it. I watched the screen light up and go dark again, the same unknown number, over and over, like someone knocking softly and pretending it was an accident. I made coffee I did not drink and stood by the window, counting the delivery trucks on the street below, forcing my breathing back into something steady. At 8:45, Evan sent a single message. We need to talk today. No greeting. No reassurance. Just need. I showered and dressed like I was going back to work, boots included. Old habit. When your life starts to slip, you cling to routine. I checked my email for the first time since the night before. Human Resources had sent a formal notice of administrative leave pending investigation. The language was clean and polite. There was no mention of the injured man. There was no mention of the night shift. Only policy numbers and timelines. I scrolled down and saw another email, forwarded from someone I did not recognize, a reporter asking for comment. Someone had given them my work address, my title, my age. I closed the laptop and felt the pressure behind my eyes build. This was how it started. Not with sirens, but with quiet paperwork. I drove to the grocery store and sat in the lot where I had met Tessa the night before. I texted her a simple question, "Are you okay?" She replied with a thumbs up and nothing else. That was enough. At 10, Dylan Brooks called. He did not waste time. He said the injured worker was stable. He said the preliminary review did not match the story being pushed. He also said that once a narrative settled, it was hard to move. People preferred clean villains. He asked me if I was ready for things to get uncomfortable. I told him they already were. Evan suggested a different place this time, a small office near the project site. Neutral ground, he said. I arrived early and watched him through the glass as he talked to the receptionist. He laughed at something on his phone. When he saw me, his face shifted into the version I knew, concern mixed with authority. Inside, he closed the door and spoke first. He said the board was nervous. He said the press was circling. He said my refusal to sign had complicated things. He asked me if I trusted him. It was a question that should have been easy. It sat between us and did not move. I told him I needed to see everything. Not summaries, not explanations, everything. He leaned back and crossed his arms. He said that was not how it worked. He said the company needed a single voice. He said the right outcome mattered more than the right process. He slid a new document across the desk, heavier than the last. He said it was a path forward. I did not touch it. I asked him why legal had approved the scaffolding purchase. He said procurement was messy. I asked him why a master account had disabled an alert. He said systems failed all the time. I asked him why he had asked me about door codes the day before the accident. He smiled and said he liked to understand the machine. When I stood to leave, he stood too. His voice stayed calm. He said if I walked out without signing, the company would protect itself. He said my mother's property records were thin. He said he did not want to see her stressed. He said this was him looking out for me. In the hallway, my legs felt hollow. Outside, the heat pressed down like a hand. I sat in my car and stared at the dashboard until my pulse slowed. Then I drove to Dylan's office. The building was old and smelled like paper. Dylan spread the documents I had brought across a metal table. He traced the approvals with a pen and did not look at me when he spoke. He said it was unusual for legal to move money like that. He said unusual did not mean illegal, but patterns mattered. He said he could request a targeted inspection, but if cameras were wiped, it would come down to intent. Intent was hard to prove. I told him about the gray sedan. He nodded like he had expected it. He said intimidation often came dressed as coincidence. He said if anyone asked, we had never met. On the way home, my mother called again. I answered this time. She asked if I was eating. She asked if the job was stressful. She did not mention the article. She never did. There are some things parents pretend not to see because naming them makes them real. That night, June sent another message. One word, tomorrow. I did not reply. I slept in fragments. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the safety panel blinking once and going dark. In the morning, I drove to a diner off the highway. June sat in a booth with her back to the wall. She did not order. She pushed a napkin toward me with a name and an address written on it. She said the Shell Company's mailbox was serviced every Tuesday at 9. She said she was done after this. Her hands shook when she stood. At 9:30, Dylan texted that the inspection was approved for the following day. Limited scope, limited time, enough to rattle cages, not enough to tear them down. Tessa called 10 minutes later and said the offline backups were still intact, but the cabinet was locked. She said she had checked the inventory list twice. One physical key, logged out to legal. I sat in my apartment and made a list. Times, names, access points. When you work logistics long enough, you learn that chaos looks random until you line it up. Then it looks planned. Evan called in the afternoon. He said we were running out of time. He said the board wanted closure. He asked me to come by the site after hours. He said he had something to show me. The way he said it made my skin prickle. I told Dylan where I was going. He told me to keep my phone on and my answers short. I told Tessa to be ready. The site at night was a different place. Floodlights cast hard shadows. The air smelled like hot dust. Evan met me near the temporary offices. He did not smile. He unlocked the door and motioned me inside. The folder on the desk was gone. In its place was a single page. A resignation letter, already dated. He said it was the cleanest exit. He said no one would remember the details in 6 months. He said I could start over somewhere else. He said some fights were not worth winning. I asked him what the key opened. He froze for half a second. It was small, almost nothing, but it was there. He recovered and said it was sentimental. I said I needed the truth. He said the truth was flexible. Outside, I heard a car idle. Not close. Close enough. My phone buzzed once. A message from Tessa. They are pulling camera feeds now. I looked at Evan and saw something else under the polish. Not anger. Calculation. He said if I walked away, things would get messy. He said he had already cleaned up once. He said he could do it again. I stepped back. I told him I needed air. He did not stop me. He watched. In the parking lot, the gray sedan was there, lights off. I walked past it without looking and got into my car. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. At home, I waited. At 11, Tessa called and whispered that the offline system was responding. She said the cabinet would not open without the key. I said I knew. At midnight, Dylan texted. Inspection starts at 8. Be ready. I lay on my couch and stared at the ceiling fan as it turned. I thought about the man in the ambulance. I thought about the clipboard. I thought about the blue ink on Evan's thumb. Somewhere between those thoughts, something hardened in me. By the time morning came, I was no longer asking how to get out. I was asking how to get everything into the light, even if it burned me too. The morning of the inspection arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no announcements, just a gray sky hanging low over Dallas and a line of trucks already idling outside the gate when I drove past the site. I did not stop. I was not supposed to be there. On paper, I was still on administrative leave, a liability with a name people preferred not to say out loud. Instead, I parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, hands in my pockets, moving like someone who had nowhere important to be. That was the first rule Dylan had taught me. If you look like you belong, most people will let you pass. I stood across the street and watched as inspectors filed in with clipboards and hard hats. Dylan was easy to spot. He moved differently from the others, slower, as if he were counting steps. Miles arrived 10 minutes later, smiling too much, talking with his hands. Evan came last. He did not look toward the street. He went straight inside. My phone buzzed once. Tessa. They are heading to the server room first. That was not luck. That was Dylan. I crossed the street and slipped into the coffee shop on the corner, the one with the cracked vinyl seats and burnt espresso. I ordered nothing and took a booth near the window. From there, I could see the temporary office building and the side entrance that led to the systems corridor. Every few minutes, someone went in or out. I counted them without thinking. Old habit again. An hour passed. Then another. The inspector group broke apart, some heading toward the loading docks, others toward the scaffolding area. The sun burned through the clouds, and the day warmed fast. My shirt stuck to my back. At 11:20, my phone buzzed again. Dylan. Camera backups locked. Legal key required. Pause. We will not force it. Not yet. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Forcing it would have meant alarms. Alarms would have meant explanations. Explanations would have meant Evan. I finished my coffee, even though it tasted like ash, and left the shop. I walked the long way home, past a row of empty lots where weeds pushed through broken concrete. The land looked patient, like it had learned to wait out worse people than us. At home, I checked the news. Another short article had gone up. Accident under review. Company cooperating fully. No names this time. That was new. Someone had decided it was better not to keep pointing at me. My mother called at noon. She asked if I wanted soup. I said no. She said she would bring some anyway. She always did that. I said okay. When she arrived, she set the container on the stove and wiped the counter like she was erasing something. She asked me if I was scared. I told her I was tired. She nodded like that made sense. She told me a story about when I was little, about a landlord who tried to raise the rent overnight. She said sometimes people pushed because they thought you would fold. She said you did not always have to push back the same way. Sometimes you just had to refuse to disappear. I watched her hands as she spoke, the small scar on her knuckle from a job she never talked about. There were things in my mother's life I had never asked to understand. After she left, I lay on the floor and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. My phone stayed quiet until late afternoon. Evan texted at 4:30. Inspection went fine. Another pause. We should wrap this up. I did not reply. At 6, Tessa called. Her voice was tight. She said the inspectors had copied everything they could. She said Evan had stayed close the whole time, offering help. She said he never once went near the cabinet with the offline backups. He did not need to. June texted at 7. They are cleaning house. Then, a minute later, I might be next. I told her to save everything. I did not know where to put it yet, but I knew not to let it vanish. That night, I dreamed of doors. Doors opening and closing, one after another, each with a different code. I woke, with my jaw clenched and my heart racing. The next day, Dylan called early. He said the inspection had turned up discrepancies. Not enough to charge anyone, but enough to justify a deeper look. He said legal had pushed back hard. He said that was interesting. He asked me if I could get my hands on the key. I did not answer right away. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the grain in the wood. The key was not just metal, it was leverage. Taking it would mean crossing a line I could not uncross. I thought of the man in the ambulance. I thought of the way Evan had said he had already cleaned up once. I told Dylan yes. The opportunity came faster than I expected. Evan called that afternoon and asked me to meet him again, same site, after dark. He said he wanted to settle things before they got out of hand. He said he did not like the direction this was going. I told Tessa where I was going. I told Dylan, too. Dylan said to keep my phone on. Tessa said she would be at her desk with the cabinet camera open. The site was quieter than before. Most of the crew had gone home. The lights cast long shadows across the gravel. Evan stood near the office door, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he was ready to work. He smiled when he saw me, but it did not reach his eyes. He handed me a pen. He said this did not have to be ugly. He said the company valued loyalty. He said I had been loyal. He said that counted for something. I asked him if he ever thought about the people who worked under us. He said of course. He said that was why he did what he did. He said someone had to make the hard calls so everyone else could keep their jobs. He said accidents happened. I asked him if he slept well. He did not answer that. When he reached into his pocket for his phone, I saw the key. It was heavier than it looked, dull metal worn smooth by years of handling. I did not think. I acted. I knocked the pen off the desk and bent to pick it up. When I stood, I bumped into him hard enough to make him stumble. He cursed, surprised. The key slid from his pocket and clinked against the concrete. For a second, we both looked at it. I picked it up. His face changed then. Not anger, something colder. He said my name once, like a warning. I stepped back and put the key in my pocket. My phone buzzed. Tessa, I see it. Pause. System opening. Evan took a step toward me. I took 2 back. Outside, the gray sedan's engine turned over. I ran. I did not run far. I did not need to. I ducked between 2 trailers and kept moving until my lungs burned. When I reached my car, my hands shook as I started it, but the engine caught. I drove without looking back. At home, I locked the door and sat on the floor. My phone rang. Dylan. He did not say hello. He said they had it. He said the cameras showed Evan in the server room, disabling alerts. He said it was clean. He said this changed everything. I closed my eyes and felt something like relief and something like grief crash into each other. Evan had been exactly who he was. I had just chosen not to see it. The news broke the next morning. Legal counsel under investigation. Company statement pending. Miles suspended. The injured worker's family set up a fund. The comments were a mess. Evan did not call again. By afternoon, Dylan warned me not to celebrate. He said people did not give up power easily. He said there were still questions about the money, about the land, about who really benefited. That night, June sent me one last message. There is something else you need to see. She attached a file with a date that made my stomach drop. Years ago, before the project, before me, I opened it and saw my mother's name. The room went very quiet. I stared at the screen until the letters stopped looking like language and started looking like shapes. My mother's name sat at the top of the file in plain black text, the kind of font used for forms and permits and things meant to last longer than people. Raina Lane. No middle initial. No explanation. Just her name, followed by a date from more than a decade ago and a string of parcel numbers I did not recognize. I closed the file. Then I opened it again. Same result. I told myself there had to be another Raina Lane. I told myself Dallas was big, that names repeated, that coincidence existed. I told myself all the things you tell yourself when the alternative threatens to pull the floor out from under you. I called June. It rang until voicemail. I did not leave a message. I sat at the kitchen table and made myself breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 4. Old tricks from long nights on the floor when inventory went sideways and panic helped no one. The file was a land transfer record. Not a deed exactly, more like an intermediary agreement. A temporary holding structure used when ownership needed to move quietly before final paperwork caught up. The land description matched the redevelopment site. Same boundaries, same access roads, same shape I had memorized from blueprints and zoning maps. I felt sick. I had spent years believing this project was my proof. Proof that I had earned my place. Proof that I could build something solid and clean and real. I had defended it in meetings. I had trained crews on it. I had told my mother that one day I would buy her a small house with a yard, paid for with my share of something honest. Now I was staring at a document that suggested the ground under all of it was not what I thought. My phone buzzed. "Dylan, you okay?" I typed back. "I need time." He replied almost immediately. "Take it, but do not disappear." I closed the laptop and stood up too fast. The room tilted. I put my hand on the counter until it steadied. For a long time, I just stood there, listening to the distant sound of traffic and the hum of the refrigerator. Ordinary sounds, safe sounds. They did not care what names were on what papers. I drove to my mother's house without thinking it through. Mesquite looked the same as it always did. Low houses, wide streets, lawns that struggled in the heat. Her car was in the driveway. The curtains were open. She was home. She answered the door with a smile that faltered when she saw my face. She stepped aside without asking questions. She always did that too. We sat at the small kitchen table where she had helped me with homework and filled out job applications and paid bills with careful handwriting. I put my phone on the table between us and slid it across. She looked at the screen. She did not touch it at first. When she finally did, her fingers moved slowly, like she was afraid the glass might bite. She did not pretend she did not recognize it. She leaned back and closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought she might cry. She did not. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, like someone acknowledging a debt. I asked her to tell me everything. She started with the year. She told me about a job she had taken when I was in high school, bookkeeping for a group of men who flipped properties fast and cheap. She told me she had not asked too many questions because questions did not pay rent. She told me about being asked to sign things as a temporary holder because her credit was clean and her name did not raise flags. She said she had believed the land would be used for storage. She said she had believed it would not hurt anyone. She said when she realized it was part of something bigger. It was already done. The papers were filed. The money had moved. The men were gone. She looked at me then. Really looked. She said she had carried it like a stone for years. She said she had told herself it did not matter anymore because the land had changed hands so many times since then. She said she never imagined it would come back into my life. I listened without interrupting. My chest felt tight, But the anger I expected did not come right away. What came instead was a dull, heavy understanding. My mother had survived by making compromises. I had survived by believing those compromises were in the past. I asked her why she had never told me. She said because you were building something. She said she did not want to poison it. She said she had thought the truth would stay buried. Outside, a lawnmower started up. The sound drifted through the window, steady and mechanical. I stood and walked to the sink. I put my hands under cold water and let it run. When I turned back, she was watching me, her face careful. I told her the truth would not stay buried now. I told her the project was under investigation. I told her legal counsel had been manipulating accidents and money. I told her her name was already in a file I could not erase. She nodded again. She said she had known this day might come. I left without hugging her, not because I did not love her, but because I did not trust myself to touch anything fragile. That night, I did not sleep. I paced my apartment and replayed everything from the beginning. The safety panel blinking once, Evan asking about codes, the clipboard at 3 a.m, my signature, the way he had talked about loyalty, the way he had threatened my mother without saying her name. By morning, the shape of it was clearer. Evan had not just been stealing money, he had been consolidating control over a project built on old, quiet compromises. He had found leverage everywhere, in systems, in people, in histories. Dylan called mid-morning. He said the footage had been verified. He said charges were moving forward. He said Evan had a lawyer now. He said there would be pressure. I told him about my mother. There was a pause on the line. Then he said he was glad I had told him. He said it changed the timeline. He said it changed the questions they would ask. He asked me what I wanted to do. That was the first time anyone had asked me that since this started. I told him I did not know yet. June called that afternoon. She sounded exhausted. She said more files had surfaced. She said some of the earliest transactions linked back to the same shell structure. She said the past was catching up to the present fast. She asked me if I was going to protect my mother. I did not answer right away. I thought of the injured man. I thought of the crews who trusted me to keep them safe. I thought of the land, patient and quiet, waiting for whatever story people wrote on top of it. I told June I was going to protect the truth. After the call, I sat on the floor, with my back against the couch, and stared at the wall. Protect the truth sounded clean when you said it out loud. It did not feel clean inside. It felt sharp. It felt like loss. Evan was arrested 2 days later. The headline said, "Fraud and Conspiracy." His photo looked smaller than I remembered. Miles resigned. Statements were issued. Apologies were made in careful language. No one mentioned my mother. Not yet. Dylan warned me that once the investigation widened, names would surface. He said there would be deals offered. He said silence would be tempting. I went back to my mother's house that evening. We sat at the same table. I told her I was not going to lie for her. I told her I was not going to hide what I knew if asked. I told her I loved her anyway. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm. She said she had lived long enough to know that some debts were paid with comfort and some were paid with honesty. She said she would accept either, but she hoped I would choose the one I could live with. When I left, the sun was setting, turning the street orange and gold. It was beautiful in the way ordinary things are beautiful when you realize they might not last. Driving home, I understood something I had not let myself understand before. This story was no longer about clearing my name. It was about deciding what kind of ground I was willing to stand on once everything else fell away. The day after Evan was arrested, the world did not pause the way I secretly expected it to. Traffic still backed up on the freeway. Coffee shops still ran out of oat milk by noon. The redevelopment site sat behind its fences, quiet now, like a machine waiting for a new operator. I learned very quickly that justice, when it comes, does not arrive with drama. It arrives with emails. At 8:12 in the morning, my phone chimed with a calendar invite from corporate compliance. Voluntary interview. At 9, I stared at the screen until the words lost their edges. Voluntary meant optional in theory and mandatory in practice. I accepted. Dylan met me outside the building, leaning against the hood of his car, jacket open despite the heat. He asked if I wanted him inside. I said no. There were things I needed to say without witnesses, even friendly ones. The conference room was too bright. A woman from compliance sat across from me with a tablet and a practiced expression that balanced concern and distance. She thanked me for coming. She said they appreciated my cooperation. She asked me to walk through the night of the accident again. I did. Slowly, precisely. I stuck to facts, times, movements, decisions. When she asked about the safety panel, I described the blink and the note I had made. When she asked about the signature, I described the clipboard and the ambulance and the man asking for his phone. I did not editorialize. I did not justify. I let the weight sit where it belonged. She asked about Evan. I told her about his questions, his assurances, his key. I told her about the threats, without naming them as threats. I watched her eyes flicker when I mentioned my mother. That told me everything I needed to know. When it was over, she thanked me again and said someone would be in touch. She did not tell me what would happen next. They never do. Outside, Dylan waited. He asked how it went. I said fine. He nodded like fine was the worst answer. By afternoon, my name was circulating again, this time in a different tone. Articles mentioned a whistleblower. Comment sections argued about responsibility. Someone dug up an old photo of me in a hard hat and called me brave. Someone else called me reckless. I did not read past the headlines. June texted to say she had been put on leave. She added a smiley face like it was a joke. I told her I was sorry. She replied that she had expected it. She said some prices were clear only after you paid them. Tessa came by that evening with takeout and a look that said she had not slept. We sat on my couch and ate noodles from the same container like roommates. She told me the system team was being audited. She told me people were scared. She told me some of them were relieved. She asked me what I was going to do. I did not have an answer that night. The following week unfolded in a series of meetings and calls. Dylan updated me on charges moving forward. Evan's lawyer pushed back on the footage, claimed context, claimed misunderstanding. Dylan said the footage did not misunderstand itself. He said intent was clearer than before. At the same time, the investigation widened. Property records were requested. Old transactions were flagged. Names from years ago started to surface in spreadsheets and emails. Some of them were strangers, some of them were not. My mother called less. When she did, she kept the conversations light. She asked about my sleep. She asked if I was eating. She did not ask about the investigation. We both knew it was there. Like a bruise you avoid pressing. One afternoon, Dylan called and asked me to come by his office. He closed the door when I arrived. He said they had found enough to suggest a pattern. Not just Evan, not just this project. He said the land had a history. He said my mother's role looked limited but real. He said there would be questions. He did not tell me what to do. He did not need to. That night, I took a long walk through my neighborhood. The dry cleaner had closed. The streetlights flickered on. A couple argued softly on the corner. Life went on in small, stubborn ways. I thought about the choices in front of me. Silence would be easier. Silence would protect my mother from public scrutiny. Silence would let me rebuild quietly somewhere else. Silence would also mean carrying the knowledge of what I had not said. Speaking would cost more. It would cost comfort. It would cost relationships. It would cost the future I had pictured, neat and earned and uncomplicated. When I got home, there was a message waiting from Dylan. We may need your statement on the early transfers. I sat on the floor and leaned against the couch, the way I had so many nights before. The room felt smaller, but my breathing stayed steady. I thought of something my mother had said years ago when I asked her why she always kept receipts. She said because memory lies when it is tired. The next morning, I told Dylan I would talk. The formal statement took hours. I described the file June had shown me. I described my conversation with my mother, what she had admitted, what she had not. I did not protect her with half-truths. I did not embellish. I told it straight, even when my voice wavered. When it was done, Dylan sat back and said he knew this was not easy. He said not many people chose the longer road when the shorter one was right there. He said this did not make me clean. He said it made me honest. The news broke a few days later. Old deals, quiet arrangements, a network of intermediaries that had operated just inside the lines. My mother's name appeared in one article, buried near the bottom. No photos, no commentary, just a fact. She called me that night. She did not yell. She did not cry. She said she had known it would happen this way. She said she was proud of me. I did not know how to respond to that, so I said I loved her. Public opinion shifted again. Some people called me disloyal. Some called me principled. Most did not care for long. The world found a new argument and moved on. What did not move on was the feeling inside me, the sense that I had crossed a line and could not cross back. It was not regret. It was not relief. It was something like clarity, sharp and a little cold. A month later, I received an offer. A different company, a role in safety oversight, independent from operations, fewer bonuses, more authority. I took it. On my last day tied to the project, I drove past the site one more time. The fences were still up. The land was still waiting. I realized then that ground does not care who claims it. It only remembers what you build and what you bury. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with a message from Dylan. "You did the right thing." I stared at it until the screen went dark. Right things rarely feel right when you are doing them. They feel heavy. They feel lonely. They feel like letting go of something you wanted very badly. I turned onto the highway and kept driving, knowing that whatever came next would be built on truth, not convenience. And for the first time since the night of the accident, that felt like solid ground. The first week at my new job felt like stepping into a room where the air was thinner. Same city, same heat, different gravity. I no longer wore a company badge with a logo people recognized. My email signature was plain. My authority came from statute numbers and inspection schedules, not from how loudly someone spoke in a meeting. I spent my days walking sites I had never seen before, places that smelled like wet lumber or hot asphalt, listening more than I talked. Workers watched me with the careful eyes people use on anyone who might slow them down. I understood that look. I had worn it myself. I told them what I always told crews when I ran logistics. I am here to make sure you go home with the same number of fingers you came with. That usually bought me a few minutes of honesty. At night, the noise in my head did not quiet the way I hoped it would. I replayed conversations. I rewrote choices. I wondered if there had been a path where no one got hurt, and no one lost face, and no one paid more than they could afford. Then I reminded myself that wondering did not change the record. Dylan checked in less often now. The case had its own momentum. Evan was out on bail. His lawyer had learned the language of regret without apology. Motions were filed. Dates were set. My name appeared in documents with lines under it, like a piece of evidence, instead of a person. June moved out of state. She sent me a postcard with a picture of a lake and one sentence written small. "It is quiet here. I hope it stays that way." I kept it on my fridge, held up by a magnet shaped like a forklift, a joke from an old crew. Tessa stayed. She got promoted sideways, the kind of move that gave you more responsibility without more protection. We met for coffee sometimes and talked about nothing important. That was our way of taking care of each other. My mother's life shrank a little. Not dramatically. No handcuffs. No headlines. Just forms and meetings, and the steady pressure of being asked to explain choices you made when explaining was not part of the job. She handled it the way she handled everything else. Quietly, carefully. She did not ask me to intervene. She did not ask me to stop the process. She asked me once if I was sleeping better. I said some nights. One evening, months after the accident, I sat in a folding chair at a community center and listened to a safety training I had written being read by someone else. Hearing my words in another voice was strange. They sounded simpler, clearer, less burdened by the reasons behind them. I watched the room as people nodded and checked their phones and took notes. This was how change happened, not in confessions or headlines, but in repetition. After the session, a man waited until the room cleared. He introduced himself as the brother of the worker who had been injured. He shook my hand hard. He thanked me for pushing the company to cover long-term care. He said his brother was learning to walk again. He said the kids liked the new routine. I did not know what to say, so I listened. When he left, I sat there longer than I needed to, letting the weight of it settle where it could do the least damage. The trial date was set for late fall. Evan's name surfaced again, louder this time. People speculated about sentences, about deals, about whether he would flip on anyone else. Miles was called to testify. He claimed ignorance. The footage did not care. Dylan asked me if I wanted to attend. I said no. Some truths were not improved by proximity. On a Saturday morning, I drove out past the city limits to a place where the land still looked like land. No fences, no signs, just a field and a line of trees that pretended to be a forest. I parked and walked until the noise fell away. I sat on the ground and pressed my palm to the dirt, feeling how cool it stayed beneath the sun. I thought about how much effort we put into pretending ground was something we owned. When my phone buzzed, I did not jump. It was my mother. She asked if I wanted to come by for dinner. I said yes. She cooked the way she always had. Too much food for 2 people. We ate slowly. She asked about my job. I asked about her meetings. We did not circle the truth. We let it sit between us like a third-place setting. At the end of the night, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a receipt from years ago, yellowed and careful. She said she had kept it because she had not known what else to do with it. I told her keeping it had been enough. Driving home, I realized something I had not wanted to admit. The project had been more than work to me because it had promised to erase my past, to prove that effort could clean anything. Losing it felt like losing a future I had rehearsed. Letting it go felt like standing without a script. Winter came quietly. The city cooled. The news moved on. Evan took a plea. The sentence was shorter than some people wanted and longer than he expected. There were no speeches. There was no satisfaction that landed clean. On the last day of the year, I stood on my balcony and watched fireworks bloom over neighborhoods I did not know. I thought about the night of the accident, how fast a life could split into before and after. I thought about how much of my job now was teaching people to notice the small things before they turned into breaks. The next morning, I went back to work. A site north of town had a faulty guardrail. A crew had learned to step over it without thinking. I stopped them. I made them fix it. Someone rolled their eyes. Someone thanked me. I wrote it down and moved on. That afternoon, Dylan texted me a photo. A file closed. A case number stamped final. He did not add commentary. I deleted the photo. I did not need proof that the past had ended. I needed practice living in what came next. At home, I took the forklift magnet off the fridge and put June's postcard in a drawer. I taped a new list to the wall. It was not a list of goals. It was a list of reminders. Check the panel twice. Ask the extra question. Do not trade silence for safety. Some nights, I still woke up with my jaw tight and my heart racing. When that happened, I sat up and put my feet on the floor and named what I could touch. Chair, table, window, ground. It worked more often than not. People sometimes asked me if I would do it differently, knowing what I knew now. I told them no, not because it was easy, but because it was true. There is a difference. Spring came. The city stretched. New projects broke ground. I stood at the edge of one and watched the first machines arrive. I did not feel pride. I did not feel loss. I felt something steadier. I had learned that building was not about claiming space. It was about accepting responsibility for what stood on it, and that was a weight I could carry. The first subpoena arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, folded into an envelope that looked too ordinary for what it carried. I stood in my kitchen holding it, reading my name printed in block letters, feeling that old tightening in my chest. I had told the truth. I had done everything I was supposed to do. None of that meant I was finished. Dylan called an hour later. He said Evan's team was widening their net. He said they were looking for leverage anywhere they could find it. He said my testimony mattered more now, not less. I asked him if my mother was in danger. He paused, which was an answer in itself. He said the questions would be limited. He said honesty was still my safest position. He said he would be there. The deposition took place in a windowless room with bad coffee and chairs, designed to make you aware of your spine. Evan sat across the table from me for the first time since the night I took his key. He looked thinner. His suit fit too well, like it had been tailored for a different body. When our eyes met, he smiled the way he always had, polite and faintly amused, as if we were still on the same side of something. His attorney asked the first questions, soft ones, designed to warm the room. My name, my role, my years with the company. I answered evenly, keeping my voice steady, hands folded in front of me. Dylan sat behind me, silent. When they moved to the night of the accident, Evan leaned back in his chair. He watched me the way a person watches a clock, waiting for a moment to point something out. I described the events again, the blink of the panel, the schedule, the clipboard. I did not look at him when I said his name. His attorney asked about my administrative leave, about my refusal to sign the settlement, about my motives. The word motive hung in the air like a smell. Evan finally spoke. He asked if I considered myself loyal. I said loyalty was not a substitute for safety. He asked if I had ever made mistakes. I said yes. He asked if it was possible that I had misinterpreted the logs. I said data did not misinterpret itself. He smiled then, wider. He asked about my mother. The room shifted. Dylan straightened. Evan's attorney watched my face closely, like a fisherman watching a line. I answered the questions they asked, and not the ones they hoped for. I told them what I knew, and how I knew it. I did not speculate. I did not defend. I did not attack. When they pressed, I repeated myself. When they tried to rush me, I slowed down. After 3 hours, the deposition ended. Evan stood and extended his hand like nothing had happened. I did not take it. He shrugged, unbothered, and left without looking back. Outside, the sun felt too bright. Dylan asked if I wanted to grab a drink. I said no. I needed air that did not smell like old carpet. That evening, my mother called. She said someone had come by her house asking questions. She said she had answered them honestly. She asked if that was okay. I told her it was exactly right. We sat in silence on the line for a while, breathing together like we used to when I was a kid, and the power went out. 2 days later, June emailed me from her new address. She said Evan's team had contacted her too. She said they offered to make things easier if she remembered certain events differently. She said she declined. She said she hoped that was still the right choice. I wrote back one sentence. It is. The pressure built in small ways. Anonymous comments appeared under articles, questioning my credibility. Someone leaked an old performance review that mentioned my temper. Someone else dug up a traffic ticket from years ago. None of it mattered on paper. All of it mattered in the way people looked at you in grocery store lines when they thought they recognized your face. At work, I focused on the basics. Checklists, walkthroughs, reports. The physical act of making a place safer grounded me when the rest felt slippery. I learned which sites needed reminders and which needed enforcement. I learned that the line between the two was thinner than people liked to admit. One afternoon, after a long inspection, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. I realized I had been holding my breath. I let it out slowly and laughed, a short sound that surprised me. Fear had become background noise. That was its own kind of danger. The call came the following week. Late in the evening, Evan wanted to meet. Not through attorneys, not through intermediaries, just him. He said there were things he wanted to say. He said it would not take long. I told Dylan. Dylan said, "Do not go alone." I said I would not. We met at a quiet park near the river, lights dim, benches empty. Evan arrived without his lawyer, jacket draped over one arm. He looked around like he was checking for cameras, old habit. He sat across from me and spoke first. He said he had underestimated me. He said he thought I would fold the way others had. He said he had not planned for me to choose the harder path. I asked him why. Not why he had done what he did, but why he thought he could get away with it. He smiled again, tired this time. He said because people always wanted the story to end neatly. He said because institutions preferred continuity over disruption. He said because everyone had something they did not want exposed. He said he was sorry, the way people say sorry when they mean disappointed. He said he never intended for anyone to get hurt. He said accidents were a risk of doing business. I stood. I told him intent did not erase outcome. I told him the ground remembered even if people did not. He watched me walk away without calling my name. After that, things accelerated. Motions were denied. Evidence held. The case narrowed and sharpened. Evan's leverage shrank. Deals were discussed. Names were traded. Dylan kept me informed without overwhelming me. He told me when to expect calls. He told me when to ignore the noise. He told me when to rest. The verdict came on a Thursday morning, quiet and procedural. Guilty pleas entered. Sentencing scheduled. There were no cameras, no crowd, just a clerk reading outcomes in a voice that made everything sound the same. I went to work that afternoon and finished an inspection report. I drove home through traffic and stopped for gas. Life continued, stubborn and unimpressed. That night, I sat on my balcony and watched the city breathe. I thought about how many times I had been told to compromise, to be practical, to keep my head down. I thought about the cost of not doing that. I thought about the cost of doing it. My phone buzzed with a message from Dylan. "It is done." I typed back, "Thank you." I did not feel victory. I felt release, thin and temporary, the kind that asks you to build something better before it fades. Inside, I made a list for the next day. Walk the site on Maple, review the guardrail specs, call the contractor about the missing signage. Small things, real things. As I turned off the light, I understood something that had taken me a long time to learn. Standing up did not mean winning. It meant refusing to lie down when the ground shifted under your feet. The quiet after the verdict was heavier than the noise before it. I had expected relief to come rushing in, loud and obvious, the way movies taught you to expect it. Instead, the days that followed felt oddly hollow, like rooms after the furniture has been moved out. The shape of my life was still there, but the echoes had changed. Work filled most of the space. I leaned into it because leaning felt safer than standing still. I drove to sites before dawn, boots crunching over gravel, clipboard tucked under my arm. I checked railings, traced cable lines with my eyes, listened to the small complaints people did not think mattered. A door that stuck, a ladder that wobbled if you stepped on the third rung, a warning light that blinked once and went dark. I never ignored those anymore. One afternoon, while I was reviewing a temporary stairwell, a young supervisor asked me why I took so many notes. He said most inspectors glanced and moved on. I told him notes were memory that did not get tired. He nodded, unsure if I was joking. I was not. The city moved on quickly. Headlines faded. New scandals replaced old ones. Evan's name stopped trending. Mine disappeared entirely. That was fine with me. I had not done this to be known. I had done it to be able to sleep. My mother's world narrowed for a while. Friends asked fewer questions. Some stopped calling. Others showed up with casseroles and awkward smiles. She handled it with the same quiet patience she had always used. When I visited, we talked about ordinary things: weather, food, television shows neither of us watched closely. We did not revisit the past unless it insisted on being acknowledged. One evening, she surprised me by asking if I was angry with her. The question landed softly, but it carried weight. I told her the truth. I told her anger had burned itself out early, replaced by something heavier: responsibility. I told her I wished she had trusted me enough to tell me sooner. She said she wished she had been braver. We sat with that between us, not fixing it, just naming it. It was enough for that night. Months passed. Summer turned sharp and bright. My routine solidified. I began teaching short safety workshops for smaller contractors, the kind that could not afford consultants but needed guidance the most. I learned how to say hard things without humiliating people. I learned how to listen past defensiveness. One morning, after a session in a converted warehouse, a woman waited while everyone else filed out. She told me she had been afraid to report a cracked beam because her boss had laughed the last time she raised a concern. She asked me what to do if speaking up cost her job. I did not give her a slogan. I told her what I knew. That silence also had a cost. That documentation mattered. That sometimes you chose between short pain and long harm. She thanked me and left with her shoulders straighter than when she had arrived. I sat alone in the folding chair afterward and stared at the scuffed floor. I realized then that the story did not end when the case closed. It changed shape. It moved into quieter places. Dylan called less often now. When he did, it was usually to check in, not to update. He told me the broader investigation was winding down. Settlements were being finalized, policies were being rewritten. He said my testimony had forced changes that would not make headlines. He said those were the ones that lasted. One afternoon, he asked if I would consider consulting on a new task force focused on accident prevention. I laughed and told him I was tired of rooms with long tables. He said that was exactly why they wanted me. I said I would think about it. The call that changed things came on a Sunday morning, an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered out of habit. The voice on the other end was hesitant. He introduced himself as the injured worker, the man from the ambulance. He said he had been given my number by his brother. He said he hoped it was okay to call. We talked for 20 minutes. About physical therapy, about learning patience again, about the sound of the warehouse at night. He told me he remembered seeing me that night, remembered my face when they lifted him onto the stretcher. He said he wanted me to know he did not blame me. He said he was grateful I had not let it disappear into paperwork. When the call ended, I sat very still. My hands were steady, my eyes were not. A week later, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a small wooden box, hand-carved, with a simple latch, no note. I opened it and found a pair of gloves, the kind used for delicate work, the leather worn soft. I understood, without being told. It was not a gift meant to repay a debt. It was a marker, a closing of a circle. That night, I dreamed of the sight again. Not the accident, the early hours, before anything broke, the warning light blinking. This time, I stopped and fixed it. The dream ended there. I accepted Dylan's offer a month later. Part-time, advisory. No title worth mentioning. I sat in rooms with people who spoke in acronyms and budgets and reminded them that systems failed at their weakest points. I told them stories without names. I watched who listened and who checked their phones. At one meeting, someone suggested a cost-saving measure that involved reducing inspections on night shifts. I felt my jaw tighten. I asked them to walk me through the math. I asked them to show me where risk went when oversight left. The room grew quiet. The measure was tabled. On my drive home, I realized I had not thought about Evan all day. The absence felt like progress. Late that fall, I returned to the original site. The fences were gone. New structures stood where weeds once grew. The place looked clean, modern, confident. I parked and walked the perimeter, reading signage, watching workers move through spaces designed to keep them apart from danger. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was, but it was better. As I stood there, I felt a familiar weight settle and then ease. Not pride, something steadier, acceptance. My phone buzzed with a message from Tessa. Coffee tonight. I smiled and typed back. Yes. We sat in the same cracked vinyl booth as before. She told me about her promotion, the real kind this time. I told her about the task force. We talked about small plans, trips we might take, things we might build that did not involve proving anything to anyone. When I got home, I wrote in the notebook I had started keeping after the accident. Not reports, not timelines, just observations. I wrote about the woman in the workshop, about the man on the phone, about the way quiet victories rarely announce themselves. I closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf. I had once believed that doing the right thing would lead to a clear ending, a moment where everything aligned and made sense. What I understood now was simpler and harder. Doing the right thing changed how you moved through the world. It changed what you noticed. It changed what you refused to ignore. That was not an ending. It was a practice, and it was one I intended to keep. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, right as I was finishing a site walk on the north side of town. The sun was high, the concrete radiating heat through the soles of my boots, and a crew was arguing about whose turn it was to haul debris. Ordinary noise. Ordinary problems. I almost missed the vibration in my pocket. It was Dylan. His voice was tighter than usual. He did not waste time on greetings. He said there was movement, not legal movement, physical movement. He said Evan had been cooperative in public and careful in private, But one thread had not gone quiet. Money. He said a portion of the funds tied to the old shell structure had never been recovered. He said someone was trying to move it before the window closed. I leaned against a stack of pallets and listened. Dylan said the transfers were subtle, designed to look like cleanup. He said they pointed toward a holding company registered out of state. He said the timing suggested someone was nervous. I asked him who. He said we were not sure yet. But your name came up again. That did not surprise me. It exhausted me. I finished the inspection and sat in my car with the engine off, watching heat shimmer above the asphalt. I had thought the worst part was over. I had been wrong before. That night, I pulled out the old notebook and started mapping again. Names, dates, entities. When logistics teaches you anything, it is that movement leaves traces. You just have to look where people assume no one will. June's files were still backed up on an external drive she had mailed me before she left. I plugged it in and began cross-referencing. The pattern was familiar. Break a large sum into smaller pieces. Move them through clean accounts. Reassemble on the other side. Whoever was doing this had learned from Evan or had taught him first. I slept in short bursts. By morning, I had a theory I did not like. I called Dylan and told him I wanted to set a trap. He listened. He asked questions. He told me what I was suggesting carried risk. I told him I knew. He asked me why I was willing to step back into it. I told him because someone else would get hurt if we did not. We agreed on a plan that did not look like one. I would attend a regional safety conference in Fort Worth, something public enough to draw attention, ordinary enough not to raise alarms. Dylan would leak a rumor through channels he knew were still being watched. The rumor would suggest that I was sitting on additional documents tied to the unrecovered funds. Not enough detail to be provable. Enough to be tempting. I hated it. I agreed anyway. The conference hall smelled like carpet cleaner and stale coffee. I wore a plain blazer and kept my badge visible. I gave a short talk about incident reporting and the danger of cutting corners. I watched the room while I spoke, noting who listened and who scanned the exits. During the lunch break, a man approached me with a practiced smile. He introduced himself as a consultant. He said he admired my work. He asked if I had considered private sector opportunities. His questions were too smooth, his timing too precise. I gave neutral answers and excused myself. That evening, my phone rang from a blocked number. The voice was unfamiliar, but the language was not. He said he represented parties interested in resolving loose ends. He said conflict was expensive. He said discretion had value. I told him to put it in writing. He laughed softly and hung up. Dylan confirmed later that the call had been routed through 3 states and a prepaid device. Amateur work or someone in a hurry. 2 days later, June emailed me from a new address. She said someone had contacted her as well. She said they wanted to know what she had kept. She said she was scared. I told her to forward everything and not respond. The next step was the hardest. We needed proof of intent. Not speculation, not patterns. A move. I did something I had sworn I would not do again. I made myself visible. I posted a single line on a professional forum, nothing explicit, a comment about unfinished reconciliations and the importance of full disclosure when histories overlapped. It was vague. It was enough. Within hours, Dylan called. The money had moved. Not all of it. Just enough to confirm the route. We followed it in real time. Accounts lit up like a map. The destination surprised me. Not Evan. Not Miles. A name I recognized but had not expected. One of the early intermediaries from my mother's time. A man who had stayed clean by staying small. Dylan moved fast. Warrants were requested. Banks were notified. The window narrowed. That night, I sat on my couch with the lights off and listened to my building settle. I felt the old tension creep back in, the sense that something unseen was approaching. I checked the lock twice. I reminded myself that fear was information, not instruction. The knock came just after midnight. I did not open the door. I asked who it was. The voice said my name like we were old friends. He said he just wanted to talk. He said this did not have to get ugly. I told him to leave. He sighed, audibly. He said people always said that at first. I called Dylan while he was still speaking. Dylan told me to stay put. He told me officers were already nearby. The man outside grew impatient. He knocked again, harder. He said I was making things difficult for people who could make my life difficult in return. He said my mother deserved peace. That did it. I opened the door partway, chain still on. I told him to step back. I told him everything he said was being recorded. I told him to choose his next words carefully. His face changed then. He smiled without warmth. He said I had always been smarter than Evan gave me credit for. He said this was a courtesy call. He said next time there would be less courtesy. Red and blue lights washed over the hallway before he could finish. He stepped back, hands up, surprise breaking through calculation. Officers moved in fast, efficient, practiced. The man said nothing else. After they took him away, I sat on the floor with my back against the door until the shaking passed. The next morning, Dylan told me the intermediary had talked. Not fully, enough. Names were confirmed, routes were exposed, the remaining funds were frozen. He told me I had done well. I told him I was tired. Weeks passed. The case closed in layers. Not dramatic, effective. Quiet settlements. Assets seized. People you would never recognize learning to live smaller lives. The danger receded the way it had come, without announcement. One evening, as I walked home from work, I realized something had changed. I was not scanning reflections in windows. I was not counting footsteps behind me. My shoulders had dropped without my permission. At home, I made dinner and burned the rice. I laughed at myself, a real laugh this time. Later, I opened my notebook and wrote one line. Visibility is power, but only if you control when it appears. I closed the book and put it back on the shelf. The fight I had not asked for was over. Not because evil had been defeated forever, but because this round had ended with fewer lies in circulation. I turned off the light and lay in bed, listening to the ordinary sounds of the city. For the first time in a long while, ordinary felt enough. The aftermath did not arrive all at once. It unfolded in memos, in quiet phone calls, in subtle changes to routines I had learned to read without thinking. Bank accounts stayed frozen, shell companies dissolved like mist under heat. Names that had once moved freely through corridors of power began to appear less often, then not at all. When systems are forced into the light, they do not explode. They shrink. I tried to let myself rest. I failed at first. My body had learned a rhythm built on vigilance, and it did not trust the silence. I woke early and walked the neighborhood while the streets were still cool, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Ordinary life had a way of reminding me what I was protecting. Dylan called to say the intermediary had agreed to cooperate fully. He said the paper trail reached farther back than we had guessed, but not far enough to threaten new people I loved. He said my mother's exposure was now limited to what had already been disclosed. He said she would not be asked to testify. I closed my eyes and let that relief move through me without resisting it. I went to see her that afternoon. She was watering her plants, moving slowly, careful not to overdo it. She looked older than she had a year ago, not because of age, but because secrets had weight, and some of that weight had finally been set down. She asked if it was really over. I told her nothing was ever really over, but the danger had passed. She nodded and said that was good enough. We sat on the porch and watched the light change. We did not talk about guilt or forgiveness. We talked about tomatoes and the neighbor's new fence. Sometimes survival looks like choosing what not to revisit. At work, my role expanded quietly. More calls, more requests to review plans before they broke ground. I learned to say no when projects tried to rush past safety checks. I learned to say yes when people came in good faith. Authority felt different now, less like control, more like stewardship. The task force Dylan had mentioned became real. I attended meetings where policy was debated line by line. I argued for redundancy, for checks that annoyed people until the day they saved someone. I used my own story sparingly. When I did, the room always went quiet. One afternoon, after a long session, a junior analyst pulled me aside. She said she had grown up watching her father come home exhausted and injured from construction jobs. She said she had chosen this career to change that. She asked me how I knew when to push and when to step back. I told her you push when the cost of silence outweighs the cost of speaking. I told her you step back only long enough to breathe. That night, as I drove home, I realized something else had shifted. I no longer felt the need to justify my choices to people who would never carry their consequences. That freedom was subtle, but it changed everything. The sentencing hearing came and went. Evan did not look at me. I did not look at him. The judge read numbers. The clerk recorded them. The room emptied. The world kept moving. A week later, Dylan invited me to lunch. He looked tired in the way people do when they have been running on purpose for too long. He said he was considering a transfer. He said cases like this had a way of sticking with you. I told him he had done good work. He said that was never the question. We talked about nothing important for a while. Then he asked me if I regretted stepping back into the mess when I could have stayed quiet after the verdict. I thought about it. I thought about the knock on my door, the phone call from the injured worker, the woman in the workshop, the funds moving in the dark. I told him no. I told him the mess had been there whether I looked at it or not. As summer edged toward fall, my life settled into a pattern that felt earned. Work. Visits with my mother. Coffee with Tessa. Occasional messages from June, now safely distant and determined to stay that way. I learned to leave my phone face down at night. I learned to trust that some things could wait until morning. One evening, I received an email from the company that had taken over the original site. They invited me to a small opening ceremony. No press, just stakeholders and crews. I hesitated, then agreed. The day of the ceremony, the site buzzed with low energy. People shook hands. Someone cut a ribbon. I stood at the edge and watched workers move through spaces designed to keep them safe. The signage was clear, the barriers solid, the warning lights bright and tested. A supervisor recognized me and thanked me for pushing standards they had not wanted at the time. He said the crew complained less now. I smiled and told him that was the goal. As I left, I paused at the spot where the accident had happened. The ground had been repoured, the surface smooth, no mark remained. I stood there for a moment, longer than necessary, then walked away. That night, I slept without dreams. The next morning, I woke with a sense of something unfinished, not urgent, just present. I made coffee and sat at the table, notebook open. I wrote about what I had learned, not as a confession, but as a record. How systems hid behind complexity. How people mistook silence for stability. How small actions accumulated into consequences no one wanted to claim. When I finished, I closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf. I did not need it anymore to remember. I needed it so others would not have to start from nothing. My phone buzzed with a message from Tessa. Road trip soon. I typed back, yes. As I stood to leave for work, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked older. Not in years, but in certainty. The person looking back at me knew where she stood, and more importantly, why. Outside, the city stretched and woke and made its usual demands. I stepped into it without armor, without excuses. There were still risks, there always would be, but the ground under my feet felt solid in a way it never had before. And for the first time since that night at 3 a.m, I did not feel like I was waiting for something to break. I thought the hardest choices were behind me. That belief lasted exactly 3 days. The letter arrived by certified mail. Thick paper, heavy envelope, the kind designed to feel official before you even open it. I stood in the hallway of my apartment building, keys still in my hand, and read my name through the clear window. I did not need to guess who it was from. Institutions have a smell. This one smelled like money and patience. Inside was an offer. Not a bribe, not exactly. It was framed as a resolution, a way to bring closure to a complicated chapter. The holding company that had absorbed the remnants of the old project was restructuring. They wanted to settle outstanding liabilities quietly. They acknowledged my role in exposing wrongdoing. They also acknowledged my early, indirect connection through my mother. The proposal was simple. I would sign a non-disclosure agreement broad enough to swallow a city block. In return, they would close the book on any remaining inquiries tied to early land transfers. No further audits, No reopened questions. My mother's name would remain where it was now, buried in filings no one read unless forced. There was even a line about compensation for emotional distress, a number large enough to change my life if I let it. I sat on my couch and read it twice, then a third time. This was the clean ending everyone had promised me in different words. Silence, traded for safety. Comfort, traded for truth. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. My phone buzzed with a text from Dylan, as if he had sensed the shift in the air. They reached out, did not they? I did not answer right away. I made dinner and did not taste it. I stared at the wall and listened to my building settle around me. Pipes clicked. Someone laughed down the hall. Life went on, unbothered by the choice sitting on my table. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her about the letter without reading it word for word. I told her what it offered. I told her what it would cost. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady. She said she would understand if I signed it. She said she was tired. She said she did not want to be the reason my life stayed hard. She said she had lived with the consequences of her choices for years, and she could live with a few more questions unanswered if it meant I could move on. That was the moment it became unbearable. I told her I needed time. She said, of course. She always said, of course. After we hung up, I sat with the letter in my hands and tried to imagine the version of myself who would sign it. That version had a quieter future, less friction, fewer looks over the shoulder. That version would wake up in a few months and feel relief first, then something dull and persistent underneath it. I knew that feeling. I had lived in it before. I called Dylan. He did not interrupt while I explained. When I finished, he said what he always said when the truth was unpleasant. He said legally, it was airtight. He said ethically, it was not his call. He said professionally, he had seen worse deals accepted for less. He paused, then added something else. He said if I signed, the investigation would not reopen, but the system that allowed it would remain intact. He said there would be no precedent set, no lesson learned by the people watching quietly from the edges. He did not tell me what to do. He did not have to. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed and watched headlights slide across the ceiling. I thought about the first time I had been told to sign something I knew was wrong. At 3 a.m, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I thought about how easy it would have been to tell myself that saving one person justified anything that came after. By morning, my body felt heavy, but my mind was clear. I went to work and did my inspections. I corrected a mislabeled exit sign. I shut down a platform with a missing rail. I watched a crew grumble and then comply. The small, immediate consequences grounded me. They reminded me that action mattered most when it was inconvenient. At lunch, I walked outside and sat on a low wall, the letter folded in my bag. I watched people pass without knowing what decision was waiting for me. No one looked at me twice. That anonymity was its own kind of test. I realized then that the twist in all of this was not Evan, or the money, or the land. It was me. It was the fact that no one was forcing my hand anymore. There was no villain to point to, no threat to outrun. There was just a choice between two versions of quiet. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. She opened the door and stepped back without speaking. We sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where this story had turned in on itself months earlier. I put the letter between us. She did not read it. She did not need to. I told her I was not going to sign it. She closed her eyes and nodded once, like she had when I first showed her the file with her name on it. She asked me if I was sure. I said yes. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was warm and familiar and human. She said she was sorry, not just for the past, but for the position she had put me in now. I told her this was not her burden to carry anymore. The next morning, I contacted Dylan and told him my decision. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said he would inform the appropriate parties. He said it would not be easy. He said I should prepare for pushback. The pushback came fast. Emails, phone calls, polite requests for reconsideration, subtle warnings about resources and time and how exhausting prolonged scrutiny could be. I answered none of them. Instead, I did something simple and irreversible. I gave my full statement to a journalist I trusted, one with a record of following paper trails instead of sound bites. I provided documents, timelines, context, not to burn anything down, but to make sure it could not be quietly rebuilt the same way. When the story broke, it did not explode. It spread. Other names surfaced. Other projects came under review. Questions multiplied. The offer on my table evaporated without ceremony. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the letter torn cleanly in half and dropped into the trash. My phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, some angry, most confused. I felt none of the adrenaline I had expected. What I felt instead was something like alignment. Not happiness, not relief. Alignment. I knew there would be consequences. There always were. But for the first time, I also knew I could live with them. As I turned off the light and lay down, I thought about how close I had come to choosing comfort over clarity. I thought about how easy it would have been to call that choice mature, responsible, pragmatic. I slept anyway. The morning came, as it always did. The morning after the story broke, my phone stayed silent longer than I expected. No sirens. No urgent calls. Just sunlight pushing through the blinds and the ordinary sound of someone upstairs dragging a chair across the floor. I lay there for a while, listening, letting my body register that nothing was actively chasing me. When the phone finally buzzed, it was Tessa. "You okay?" I typed back. "Yes, tired." She replied with a single word. "Proud." I got up and made coffee. I burned the first pot and laughed out loud when the smoke alarm chirped once, annoyed rather than alarmed. I opened the window and let the smell drift out into the day. It felt important to keep doing small things, to remind myself that life still required participation. The response to the article came in waves. Not outrage exactly, more like recognition. Emails from people I did not know who said they had seen the same patterns in different cities. Messages from workers who said they had stopped reporting near misses because nothing ever changed. A few notes from former colleagues who said nothing at all but attached documents they had kept, just in case. I forwarded everything to Dylan and did not comment further. My part, for now, was done. There were consequences, of course. Contracts paused, audits reopened, meetings scheduled and canceled and rescheduled again. I was asked to step back from the task force while things settled, not as punishment, as optics. I agreed without argument. Visibility cuts both ways. The first day without work felt strange. I took a long walk and ended up at a park I had not visited in years. Children ran in uneven circles, inventing rules as they went. A man played guitar badly near the benches. No one cared. I sat on the grass and let the sun warm my face. It occurred to me that this was the first unstructured afternoon I had allowed myself since the accident. My mother called just before dinner. She said reporters had left notes on her door. She said she had thrown them away. She asked if I wanted to come over. I did. We cooked together, moving around each other in the small kitchen with practiced ease. At one point, she stopped and looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. She said she had always worried that the compromises she made would become mine. She said watching me choose differently had changed something in her too. I told her I had learned that survival and integrity were not opposites. They were just negotiated over time. That night, I slept deeply, without dreams. The weeks that followed were quieter than I had imagined. The investigation widened, but it no longer centered on me. Systems were examined, procedures rewritten. Some people resigned, others adapted. The world did what it always did when forced to look at itself. It adjusted enough to keep going. Dylan transferred, just like he said he might. He called to tell me on his last day. He said he was tired but satisfied. He said cases like this reminded him why he had started. I thanked him for standing when it would have been easier to step aside. June sent me another postcard. A different lake. The same sentence, underlined this time. "It is quiet here. I hope it stays that way." I hoped so too. I eventually went back to work, but not in the same shape. I turned down roles that would have pulled me back into the center of things. I accepted a position training inspectors and supervisors, moving from site to site, teaching people how to notice before it was too late. It paid less. It mattered more. On my first day, I stood in front of a group of new hires and told them a story without names or dates. I talked about a warning light that blinked once and went dark. I talked about a signature made under pressure. I talked about how systems did not fail all at once. They failed quietly, with permission. No one took notes at first. Then someone did. Then others followed. After the session, a young man waited until the room cleared. He asked me how you lived with the aftermath of doing the right thing when it cost you comfort. I told him you learned to live with less noise. You learned to recognize peace even when it was not easy. He nodded like he would remember that later. My mother's life found a new rhythm. Fewer appointments, more mornings in the garden. We did not pretend the past had not happened. We simply stopped letting it dominate every conversation. That felt like progress. One afternoon, months later, I drove past the original site again. The buildings were finished now. Trucks moved in and out on clean schedules. Workers wore gear that fit. Signs were posted where they needed to be. I parked across the street and watched for a while. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. As I turned to leave, I realized something had finally settled. I was no longer measuring my life against what I had lost or what I had exposed. I was measuring it against what I was willing to protect. At home, I took the notebook off the shelf one last time. I flipped through the pages filled with observations and reminders and names that no longer needed to be written. I closed it and placed it in a box with old manuals and certifications. History, not a guide. That evening, Tessa came over with takeout and 2 beers. We sat on the floor and ate straight from the containers. She asked me if I would do it all again, knowing the cost. I thought about the offer I had refused, the quiet I had chosen instead, the ground I stood on now. I said yes, not because it made me feel brave or righteous or clean, but because it let me wake up without rehearsing excuses. When she left, I washed the containers and turned off the lights. I stood by the window and watched the city settle into night, each building holding its own small stories, most of them unseen. I understood then that this was the real ending. Not victory, not punishment, choice. The kind you make when no one is forcing you. The kind that shapes who you become after the story is over.